Hello, I'm Al, welcome to the Guitar Shack. So today's video is about this Epiphone ES-345 that I've managed to acquire. I say managed to acquire because they're actually pretty rare in the UK at the moment, and they're very nice guitars. So the 345 is the middle child in the Gibson ES semi-acoustic range. So it started off with the 335, which is the absolute classic, which everybody knows and loves. The 345 added on the parallelogram fret markers to give it a little bit more bling, and it added the varitone circuit to give it more tonal variety. And then the ES-355, top of the range, added even more bling with big block markers, more binding, extra binding around the edges. And electronically, it's the same as the 345. So this is the kind of sweet spot, not quite as bling as a 355, but a bit more down to earth, but not as plain as the 335. So it's always been one of my favorites, I think, and possibly influenced by the fact that a red version of this with a Bigsby was the iconic guitar that Marty McFly played in Back to the Future. So I think there's a whole generation of people like me who have always wanted, a semi-acoustic with nice block markers on it, and that's been the inspiration. So the Epiphone version of the semi-acoustic range started off with the ES-335 copy, the Dot, in the late 1990s, and that's a really good guitar. They have got decent build quality. They are close but not identical body shape wise to a proper 335 or Gibson 335. The name Dot came from the original style dot markers, so it's a bit plainer. Um, Downsides to them has always been some criticism over the pickups. They're either warm and jazzy, if that's your persuasion, or they're muddy, if that's not your persuasion. I've always quite liked them personally, and I think they're good value guitars. You can pick them up really cheaply. They play really nicely, decent build quality, and they're a great staple to have in a collection or as a main guitar or one to learn on or just as a backup. So they ran to about the mid 2010s, and then they introduced the Pro version, and the Pro version brought better pickups, but still the original headstock shape. So it brought the Alnico Classics, which is what's actually in these still, and they had switchable coil splits in the electronics, and then those in turn were replaced, I'm going to say early 2020s, by the current versions, which are the Inspired by Gibson versions. So they took it a bit further. I believe the body shapes were tweaked so that they are slightly more accurate to the Gibson originals. They introduced this headstock, which is known as the Kalamazoo headstock, which is an original Epiphone style. And it's a bit smaller, which is one of the criticisms of the old Dots, which had a casino style headstock, which was longer and more bulbous. Um, and they replaced the electronics with simplified, better quality loom, which got rid of the coil splits. And there might have been improvements in some of the hardware as well. So that was the 335, and at the same, they did various versions of that. They still do, and they brought equivalent improvements along the way to the Sheratons, which were also in production all that way through as well. Where the 345s came into it, though, was slightly different because Epiphone did a version of this in 2011, 2012, something like that, and it was very limited production. You don't see many of them about, certainly not here in the UK, and most of them tended to be black. I've seen them in Pelham blue, which are pretty cool. They might have done them in red. I'm not sure I've ever seen one in red. But rare as hen's teeth, and I've never quite understood why, because there's a lot of I mean, the 345 itself is an iconic guitar. The Marty McFly thing, particularly, put it out in red with a Bigsby, and you would think they'd be raking it in. Because it's just a slightly nicer version of the 335, which is a fantastic and very versatile guitar. Anyway, scroll forward to end of 2023. These started to appear, and then more in the shops in 2024, but they're still very rare. You don't come across them very often. And so this is the Inspired by Gibson version. So it's got the headstock updates, it's got the wiring updates, but to all intents and purposes, it's a 335 with the parallelogram inlays and the varitone system. So I've managed to acquire this one. Currently, they are available for sale at most of the online retailers in the UK, but out of stock. And I think there's one saying possibly in the next month or so they'll have some stock. Everyone else, you can order it, but they can't give you a date. So I don't know what's going on with the supply of them, which is a shame because it is a very cool guitar. And I would have thought it'd be an obvious thing to keep in the Epiphone range. I don't know whether they're intending to do it as a special edition or what's going on. They certainly didn't say much about it when they launched it, which has been much commented on by people on the online forums. So what I'm going to do today is talk about this one, which I've acquired. It's secondhand. Somebody bought it on a whim. I guess he probably liked the Marty McFly bit, and then not really his style of guitar, so he sold it on to me. And as with all modern Epiphones, it's really, well, certainly the set neck ones, and the further up the range you go, the nicer they become. It's nicely made, very nice build quality. It's no obvious flaws on it. The hardware is all nice and solid. The fretwork is certainly can do with a polish. I am going to clean it. I'm going to check all the fretwork, and then I'm going to set it up and restring it and then set it up, and then it will be up for sale. What I'll probably find is that it's the fretwork which is required on this. It feels pretty decent on the fret ends, to be fair. Quite often Epiphones out the box are quite high action because the fretwork could do with a bit of a level and crown and polish. So I'm going to make sure that the frets are in good shape. I'm going to set it with a decent low action, and that's what I'm going to be showing you today. Before I get into that, just a couple of sounds. So the clean arm, bridge pickup. Middle position. And then neck. And then varitone. So that's position 0, which I think is bypassed. Bypassed. Position 1. Position 2. Position 3. Position 4. Position 5. So it's basically cutting out the bottom end in predictable steps, I guess you'd say. I don't know. It gives you more tonal variations. I'm not entirely convinced there's a huge amount of variation in there that I would actually use. I mean, with me, basically, neck pickup, bridge pickup, stick it in the middle, and that pretty much covers my bases. I'm sure that more sophisticated citizens than me may well find a use for it. I know, was it Freddie King and BB King used to use the baritone, and in fact, the BB King, Lucille, both the Gibson version and the Epiphone version of that guitar have the baritone because he used to use it. So I'm sure there's magic in there somewhere. It's I'm not sure it's something that I'd be using a lot of. Possibly. Anyway, let's get into having a look at the guitar itself. So the first thing I did was to get the strings off and check the fret levels with a rocker, and as is pretty normal, there was 7 high frets. Now that's not the end of the world because they weren't causing any buzzes, but the action was pretty high at over 2 millimeters on the 12th fret. While it would have gone lower, generally my view is that I want to get any guitar in the best setup it can be, so for that, level frets is a baseline that you need to build on. And really with new guitars, I think of it as the kind of labour intensive final finishing that the factory just can't really afford to do within a sort of sub £1,000 price point, but it makes a huge difference to the playability of the guitar in the end. So what you're seeing here is that I levelled them all and then I checked them all again and then I levelled them again a second time to make sure they're perfect, and then I'm going through with a crowning file to restore the centre points to the frets. And then after they're polished up, this is the end result. Then when I was finished with the neck, I cleaned the body and then I gave it a couple of coats of wax to protect it and polish it up to a nice shine. And I cleaned out all the electronics with switch cleaner to make sure there was no crackles. So here is the cleanup complete. Time to get her strung up and do the setup. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is set the nut height. Now, the quick way to check is if you fret at the 3rd fret and then you push the string down over the 1st fret, there should be a tiny gap. You should be able to just see it moving, and if you're up close, I'm not close enough to it because I'm videoing it, but you should be able to hear it tap. In this case, you can see that there's definite movement, and you can see actually quite a gap reflected between the fret and the string itself. So these are all needing to come down, and it's very much a process of trial and error. Various ways you can do this. One is just to take each one down a little bit at a time, check it, take another few strokes, check it, until you get to a point where you're happy and it's not got much deflection, but there is a gap, and you play it and it plays clean. The trouble is sometimes you go too far past that. So the second way of doing it is with feeler gauges, and you look for a particular gap between the bottom of the string and the top of the fret. Typically, I keep it simple. I go for 20, 20, 18, 18, 16, 16, which is still relatively high. Some people will go lower. I've seen some people talking 10, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 as a method. I've tried that before, and maybe it's my cutting precision, but it's just felt a little bit too low and a little bit close to being buzzy. So I keep it a bit conservative. So in this case, instead of feeler gauges, what I'm using is a nut slotting gauge from StewMac, which is quicker and more consistent, but it is more expensive, a lot more expensive. So, you know, you don't need one of those, but it's handy if you do a lot of nut slotting. So that's us on the home straight. So nuts been lowered to where it should be. The frets have been leveled. Plays nicely. So let's just, I'm just going to confirm the setup really. So after doing the nut and doing everything else, we are at exactly 10 thou relief. Now that's quite nice. Gives us plenty of room to get under. And then it leaves me at exactly 1.5 mil on the high E and about 1.6 mil on the low E. Again, basically I'll go all over the fretboard and check, but it doesn't feel like there's anything buzzing. I will go through that, but that feels like a nice setup for this guitar, so I'm going to leave it there. So unless I find anything unpleasant when I go through the entire fretboard. The only remaining steps therefore are I'm going to set the intonation, which I'm not going to show you on camera because, you know, it's on most of my videos, it takes a long time and it's just not very entertaining. And then I'll set the pickup heights. So that's basically it. So this will obviously get the truss rod cover back on it. It'll get another coat of wax, and then it'll be going in its original Epiphone branded soft case, and then it'll be going up for sale on my reverb shop in the next few weeks. So I hope you found that interesting. If you are interested in this guitar, and I hope you are because it's gorgeous, then please drop me an email. Be my website, which is alansguitarshack.com, or it'll eventually go up on Reverb, which is Alan's Guitar Shack on Reverb. Okay, thanks for watching. Hope you found that interesting, and I'll see you back in the shack soon. So this guitar is now up for sale on my Reverb shop. If you just go to reverb.com and search for Alan's Guitar Shack. Alternatively, my website is alansguitarshack.com. Hope to see you there. Thanks a lot.